say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Welcome back to the Utah Legislative Update. This is Senator Wayne Niederhauser, President of the Utah Senate, and with me I have Senator Adams, and I think we have on the phone Senator Urquhart. Are you with us, Senator Urquhart? Maybe not. We'll hopefully have him here shortly. But we're talking about school grading, and we have Senator Adams, who is the sponsor of the bill that amended school grading that I passed 2 years ago. And we're talking about letting the public know that these grades will be out next week on September 3rd. You will know what your community schools will be graded. And it's on a very clear system of A, B, C, D, and F. And it's just going to bring some clarity. It's going to bring some understanding. And I think that we need to emphasize, Senator, that this is not necessarily an indictment on schools or teachers or anyone else. We all own these grades. We own them as a community. We own them as a legislature. We own them as a business community. And we need to rally around these areas where we have some failing schools because we owe it, I believe, to those students to give them the best opportunity to be productive and to have a good education and be prepared for college and career.
You're exactly right. This is about kids, and education is more than just learning. I read a statistic the other day that said 85% of the kids in the juvenile justice system are fundamentally illiterate. The other statistic was 75% of the adult prisoners can't read. And if you don't, education gives you a sense of self-esteem. And if you can't read or write or don't have the tools that education gives you, you're going to find a way to express your thoughts and feelings, perhaps in another way. And you can't, the cost of taking care of students who don't have a good education is so significant on our society. I'd like to maybe talk a minute or two, if we could, about there's been a lot of comments about school grading. And there were comments perhaps about whether this was on a curve and whether there had to be so many A or B schools and so many C or D schools and so many D schools. We hear a lot about a curve, but this piece of legislation actually set the 2011-12 year as a base year, and so that benchmark is there. And any school who performs in a comparative way better than that 2011-12 year can get an A. And actually, there was a district in Florida who set a goal, and their goal was to only have A and B schools. And they worked and they accomplished that goals, and they don't have any C, D, or F schools in their district. And so there isn't anything holding back a school from receiving an A or a B grade as long as they perform and work on the standards according to the 2011 and 12 base year.
And the way the grades are given, we give for elementary schools, for junior highs and middle schools, 50% of the grade is based on the performance, the actual test scores of the students on the criterion reference tests, which now will be computer adaptive testing. But 50% of the grade is that, and 50% of the grade is on growth. So if a school gets a student, they don't necessarily pick their students, but half their grade will be determined on how they are able to progress that student. And in the legislation, that's sufficient growth, which we've interpreted to be a year's worth of growth. And there's been some argument that we should give credit for half years of growth versus just a full year of growth, but that seems to be counterintuitive to what we're trying to do with school grading. The motivation and the incentive would be to get a third grader to fourth grade and not third grade to almost fourth grade, right, Senator?
You're exactly right. It's important that growth that a student be compared against themselves. So you might have a student that's a high-performing student and getting perhaps scores in the 90s. If that student now gets scores in the 80s, that student wouldn't get growth. If you got a student, though, that's in the 60s, and he starts scoring or she starts scoring in the 80s, even though those two scores would be the same, 80, the student that moved from 90 to 80 doesn't get growth, but the student moves from 60 to 80 gets growth. So they're compared against themselves. So there's a lot of concern about schools that have high-performing students or schools with a lot of AP students having an advantage. But actually, as you mentioned earlier, we've seen with school grading, the student that actually benefits most from this are the non-performing students. And again, in Florida, they had their non-English speaking students who actually excelled to the point that they actually scored higher than the average student in Utah. And that's a phenomenal accomplishment as we understand the challenges of taking a non-English student and trying to educate them.
First of all, we got to start with clarity. We all need to understand where the problems are, and that's what school grading does. And then we've got to do something about it. And this will be a big discussion, I believe, in the next legislative session, because the grades come out next week on Tuesday, the 3rd. We'll be able to discover where we've got some problem schools where students are maybe not getting the best opportunity that they can. And we'll need to, as a legislature, as a state school board, as citizens, as business leaders, rally around those schools and help move the dial for them.
You know, every accountability system struggles with calculations, and there isn't an accountability system that has been invented that doesn't have some refinement or some need to be able to be perfected. And I fully expect that over a period of time as we move forward and as we use the A, B, C, D, and F grades, there's going to be, I hope anyway, a lot of public involvement, a lot of involvement from the education community, and as we get that involvement, we'll get feedback, and we'll actually be able to refine and perfect this. And I think, I hope the schools look at this as an opportunity to see what they can do to become better, as the other states have done. You know, we have a great opportunity in Utah. I think our future is extremely bright. We have twice the birth rate of the nation. We have a lot of kids in Utah. But right now, we've seen schools and we've seen universities and colleges go to online learning. Weber State's been a leader in it. And they've been able to use the new technology that's come out to be able to try to educate the kids. So with that, I think that we're in an age where, with new technology and the capacities we have within the school system, to be able to make sure every school in Utah becomes an A or B school.
So I think you bring up some great points there. We also, I think, need to emphasize, as we're talking about lifting the people that are these students that are non-proficient, is in the growth part of the grade, we actually double weight the grade if you move a student that is underperforming. So it's double incentive to focus on this population and lifting that population up.
And I think that's what you're going to see. As I think as you see these talented educators, who I think are some of the best in the nation, and administrators who understand the value of measuring performance, you're going to see those kids that are struggling be focused on, and they, because of the weighting system that they do receive at double weight, you'll see them excel, and that's surely our hope. Anyway.
Once again, I think listeners and the public should understand that this is not a finger-pointing policy. Pointing your finger to a particular group or teachers or schools. All is happening in our schools, and we all need to rally around to lift those who are underperforming. We have a question from one of our listeners today. The question was, and this is a good question for the sponsor of 271, was SB 271 purposely withheld to avoid public funding? Is it an excuse for vouchers?
You know,
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but maybe you have some insights there, Senator.
I'm not sure I understand the question either, but I'd say absolutely not. We again have opportunities and perhaps some challenges in Utah. We have the lowest per pupil spending in Utah, but we also have, and we have over 50% of our budget being spent on education. And the last statistic I saw rated Utah as number 5 in the nation as far as the states that spend percentage-wise on education. So that means there's 44 states in the nation that spend less as a percentage of their budget than Utah on education. So we have the lowest per pupil, but one of the highest as a percentage of budget. Means we have a very committed legislature to education. We always try to do our best to try to fund growth and try to take care of the needs we have with education. But because our birth rate is double the national average, we'll probably never rise from the bottom of, I say, the pure pupil spending. But what I talked about earlier was that's a challenge, but we have an exciting opportunity because the new technology that's come out. I mean, I had a granddaughter who had a preschool program that was actually done on the computer at home with very little help from her parents. And that computer program, she walked into school reading, and she's currently in school reading she's in first grade, reading on a third or fourth grade level. But that was done on an online basis through technology. And we have opportunities, I think, to be able to handle that per pupil spending problem that we have in Utah because of our large families.
I've actually had some experience with this question, so to the listener who's given us that question, I met with some of the education community not long ago, and they presented to me the argument that we were doing this to privatize schools, and I really didn't understand that because it hasn't been on my radar screen at all. And there's really, I think we need to emphasize that there has been no intent. And I didn't understand how you could privatize schools through this at all, but apparently there might be some legislation called the Parent Trigger, and we can talk maybe a little bit about that when we come back in our next segment, what the Parent Trigger bill would do, especially with the schools that would be getting a failing grade. So hopefully we'll continue this discussion on school grading. Stay with us. This is KHQN 1480 Utah Legislative Update.